So it's been almost a year since the start of the pandemic, and we would like to hear from you today about what you've learned at NWIS from providing data and technology in a crisis, through your response to support the NHS, not only to work remotely and securely, but to help them manage their response to fighting COVID. So what we're interested in is the challenges that you've faced, the new solutions that you've brought in, and finally, what you've learned and how from the pandemic and how your approaches have evolved.
So I'm Darren Lloyd. I'm Head of Information Governance for NHS Wales Informatics Service. So myself and my team have been working in tandem with all of the component parts of NWIS, NHS Wales, Public Services and Welsh Government to a large extent, and not forgetting Public Health Wales Trust, who have been the front of the pandemic response in many ways. So myself and my team have been working hard to understand the fact that we needed more and more information at a very quick pace, at a very rapid pace. But we had to make sure that was set against that we didn't forget about those privacy and confidentiality requirements at the same time. So as Carwyn and Rachel has mentioned, it's that rapid deployment of information in many sources in many ways across multiple channels effectively that we've needed to consider, and also make sure that the arrangements around that multi-channel sharing of data was absolutely robust and continue to be robust through everything that we've done prior and during and post-pandemic actually. So we've been part of that sort of support around the test, trace and protect strategy. We've brought together, of course, lots of public services, because certainly around the 22 local authorities, 7 health boards and 3 trusts, there's been massive information sharing across the TTP programme. So across certainly around the testing and the tracing element, local authorities are heavily embedded in that work. Whilst NWIS has provided a lot of technology around that, we had to work out a lot of the information governance challenges around that to make sure that the data was available, but also was safe and secure to allow all of those programs of work to function. So we've used already established frameworks around information governance to achieve what we needed to do, things like the Wales Accord for Sharing Personal Information, or WASPI for short. We used that in order to create an agreement between all of those parties to make sure that we were transparent and had those responsibilities of those parties to understand what they needed to do and what they needed to access in terms of that client or patient level information. So that was really important. So we achieved something by, for the first time, bringing together those public services in a coherent way. So we had one agreement and everybody agreed with what they needed to do over that TTP process. So we had to understand what we needed to do in the testing, the tracing, and then the protect as separate functions as well, but also as an amalgam of the response to the pandemic, which was really important. So the frameworks we were using, we were building upon those good pieces of work that we'd already created. Of course, there were other things as well where we had to understand regulations, rules under things like general data protection regulations, that regulations are not necessarily that well known either to other organisations. Things like the Control of Patient Information regulations, where there were certain conventions that we had to comply with that had to be relaxed in order for information to be shared in these circumstances. So there was a relaxation of the COPI regulations as the shorthand to that, to allow that information sharing function, so we had a lawful basis for sharing. So we had to work through all of the regulations and the lawful basis for us to share the data as well at the same time, but as a collective set of individuals who were responding to the pandemic work. Together with that is we couldn't forget all of the baseline requirements while we were setting systems up, things like data protection impact assessments, understanding the privacy challenges when we were creating the systems and then building the information upon them. So Rachel came up with the information side of it and the COVID hub, We had to understand how the information would be accessed, by whom, and under what circumstances, aggregate information or slightly more identifiable information, to ensure that we were still protecting the privacy of that individual patient data at the same time as making sure all that information was made available. So really important things, and as Rachel said, we worked in tandem. Together with the tracing system, there was that availability of that information. So those individuals who were part of that tracing process in the local authorities understood their requirements for accessing that data and then committing to that trace, so that public health and the sort of the wider NHS and public services could highlight and spotlight individuals who needed to isolate or needed to self-isolate because they tested positive. And having that connectivity of information, Karen has talked about the fact that there was tests. So those test results needed to feed into other systems and services. So there was a huge shift of data back and forth into these other respective systems, so that we had a whole economy of that information sharing and that requirement. The other big thing, of course, is the Welsh immunisation system that Karen talked about. Rapid access to vaccination data on a whole-scale basis on an all-Wales level, because the vaccinations are being taken up not by one set of administrators. It is a team. It is a team concentrated effort. So you have hubs vaccinating, you have primary care vaccinating, and there may be in the future where we know that the vaccination system is not going to stop in 12 months. It is inevitably going to continue on for a period of time. So it's rapid access to multiple users of the immunisation system, but also to make sure that they have access to that particular patient and know that either that individual has received no vaccinations, one vaccination, two, or it's a top up of those type of things. So we had to have tight governance controls in place around that. And again, we've used work that we've already played across other systems, things like the National Intelligent Integrated Auditing System, that covers off the fact that we are protecting that data by monitoring the access into that system, so that we can confidently say that we are not compromising on patient privacy or confidentiality while we do this rapid rollout. It's important that we maintain that balance and make sure that patients and clients are made aware of the fact that we are protecting protecting them in that way. Working together as well with the Information Commissioner's Office, making sure that they're aware of what we were doing and consulting them when required, in order so that we could understand that we were doing the right thing. We were doing the right thing, and the ICO were following the path that we were taking, and we're happy that we were following that path, either through formal consultation or informal discussions with the ICO. So really in tandem with the Information Commissioner's Office as well, upholding those patient rights. And then I suppose quite quickly, the challenges as well of the fact that, and some of the challenges Karen talked about, some of the business as usual functions, is the fact that the NHS Wales Informatics Service is going to be created as its own statutory organisation as of the 1st of April. So there are lots of governance arrangements that have need to be set over the last 12 months, certainly in anger over the last 12 months, in order to understand the responsibilities of a brand new statutory organisation. So we've had to kind of do that at the same time as doing all of the other elements as well required as part of the COVID pandemic. And what it's done is spotlight the importance of data, importance of sharing information, and the importance of a central organisation with that responsibility as well, and how we can take what we've learned today forward into the new organisation and make sure that we do have a better community of practice and a better collaborative response to using information and information sharing, basically. So I'll stop there, and I'll hand over to Claire to wrap up on her elements.
Thank you, Darren. My name's Claire Osmundsen-Little. I'm the Director of Finance for NWIS, and unlike my colleagues, so Karen was busy working on security, the technical and the capacity. Rachel and the team were busy looking at the data and data analysis and the understanding of the spread of the pandemic, and Darren was busy doing the IG governance work. my work was really covering the systems part of IT. And the challenge we had there was to really implement national systems from scratch in a very short space of time. So the first challenge that I was involved with related to the track, trace and protect. The requirements were quite vague and open, I would say, when we first started that journey. And actually, early doors, we went and looked at what was happening across the world in terms of Germany and New Zealand to see what other solutions were already on the market, to see if we could do almost a cut and a paste type review. And we went quite down that road, looking at the commercial and legal consequences and commitments we would have to make with those solutions. In the meantime, we also then looked at what the other nations were doing closer to home. And in that, we went and looked at what Northern Ireland were doing with their sort of dummy model around the track and the trace. And on reflection, we thought, actually, we could build our own in a far more agile way that would enable us to react and develop as the system requirements were going to become clearer, rather than be tied into quite a constraining, legally binding contract that would constrain our ability to flex. So having got agreement to go and procure something, we then backtracked and decided to go in a different direction, which I know did raise a few eyebrows at the time in terms of an approach. So we decided to build our own using technology that was pretty new to us, but with trusted suppliers that had the commitment and the flexibility to develop with us and would put that commitment in a commercial contract, which was quite useful at the time. So it gave us that flexibility to grow, shrink without any significant financial consequences. So we decided to design, build, procure, develop and implement a national system, and we did that in 40 days and 40 nights. So it was quite probably a groundbreaking in terms of an approach. So the design part was interesting because we decided to work jointly. So we wanted to develop our staff to sustain that development and knowledge within the organisation, because this is a direction we want to go in. We procured it and the procurement team worked through the night. We procured it using a US supplier. So they would make decisions in the early hours, and we quickly turn that round into proposals and then get it through the procurement process. The procurement process itself was made lean and fast to reflect the pace that we needed to go at. However, the governance process was not overlooked, and we had, together with our Valindra colleagues, had an additional scrutiny panel that we took the procurement proposals through, which again added extra assurance on both sides, actually, that we had an arrangement that was going to work well. Again, the development team got together and worked hand in hand with the supplier to develop the initial minimum required product, but to come up with something. And then we implemented that nationally. And we were all quite nervous, I think it's true to say, because it was an unproven product, and there were a lot of unknowns. And there was two things that I think early on, we were quite emotional, I think, at the time. Was the first, there was an outbreak up in North Wales early on in a meat factory, and this showed actually the benefits of a national system. Inevitably, that led to a lot of tracing, but as we had a national system, we could spread that workload across Wales so we could help each other out, which was great, and we did. And then the other bit was we had to obviously pull together a lot of early reporting. That was done BI. I mean, our skill set wasn't altogether as good as it was in Cardiff and Betsy. So again, they came to the fore, and we actually used their capability and knowledge set to develop a set of reporting tools. So it showed really collective working to get this national system up and running and working effectively. And again, it was once for Wales. We talked about it a lot, but here we actually delivered it in quick speed and which really represented true value for money. To be fair, the procurement team had set something up to enable us to grow, but also to leave if it didn't work. So that showed, I think, leadership and development in that particular area. And it laid the ground for what would come next, which was the vaccine system, which again, from a development perspective, we piggybacked on a system that was already in place that enabled us to have a one solution that would be adopted across Wales and underpin the vaccine system and the rate and speed at which we successfully did that in Wales. I suppose for me, on reflection, what it demonstrated was, I took myself completely out of my comfort zone in terms of system development. We had to make decisions and take leadership even when we didn't know all the answers, and in sometimes it paid off and sometimes it didn't, but if it didn't, we'd find a way to get around it and make it work. And also I think as we move on, and Karen's right, who knows what's next. We're now talking about apps for scheduling vaccines and all sorts of things. For me, it's about, we've demonstrated our ability to react and deliver key systems that have supported the pandemic. And I'm sure we'll do exactly the same for the recovery. And what's quite exciting is we've now learned a lot about what we can do with the toolkit we've got. That toolkit is now mobile. It's now very much using Office 365, where we can work and react more collaboratively. So as we move into the next phase of this pandemic, we are at the forefront of being able to support our colleagues in the other areas of the NHS in ensuring that we get through this together. So I'm going to hand back to Andrew now.
Well, thanks, Carwyn, Rachel, Darren and Claire, for sharing with us your data and technology responses and perspectives at NWIS in terms of help fight the COVID pandemic. So just to conclude now, with a future focus, what would you say are the top 2 takeaways of what you've learned over the last 12 months to take forward?
From my perspective, it is that collaborative working, certainly from an information side, is the fact that, there was a resolution and a resolve actually in order to get it to work, to actually, because there was an expediency that we'd never experienced before. There's always priorities, but in order to get that information at the heart of the fight in the pandemic was absolutely key. We had one shared vision that moved across public services and other services, and those allied to help in those public services as well. So that vision was absolutely clear, and that the amount of information that was required to be shared across all of that economy was massive, and some of it was building on good foundations, as Carwyn has mentioned. The fact that we were able to do things previously on a once for Wales basis, which meant we could accelerate things at a much quicker pace. It allowed us to do that. It did stretch those foundations and did really, flex those foundations. So that's where we needed to build on them to make sure that they didn't break. But certainly from my perspective and a governance perspective, we were making sure that we could resolve those challenges as quickly as possible, so we weren't compromising on what was at the heart of this. So that was a big thing. And of course, it's about that balancing all the time. You have to come back to the centre and make sure that your decision making is robust and is transparent as well, and you're doing it for the right reason, because the public don't see the mechanisms and the behind what might be a set of data, or might be a system, or might be the fact that somebody's contacted them to say that they've tested positive. The inner workings of the system is immense. Now, it's immense in health under normal circumstances. Under these circumstances, the cogs were whirring even faster and greater in order to have that visibility of what was happening to tackle the pandemic, and to give the public the reassurance that it was being tackled. But across public services, the amount of work that was required and the amount of information that was shared was, just can't be underestimated. And we want to kick on from that. We want to be able to use this learning in order to do the good things that we need to do under normal circumstances. We've already achieved a huge amount before the pandemic, but I think this can give us the ability to kick on and really use this innovation in ways that we probably hadn't anticipated prior to the pandemic. So I'll finish off on that one.
Thank you, Darren. And I suppose mine sort of sums up everyone, really. We've had to be quite brave and quite bold at times, and actually quite creative in the way that we do things. And I don't think when we look back and how our journey of how we've increased capacity, how we've stretched the systems and made them into some new systems, and how we've used the data and presented it, we would really have done that. We would ever have thought we'd done it, to be honest. The other bit for me has been really important is holding each other's hands and supporting each other together, whether that's within NWIS or outside NWIS. So if it didn't work, or if something went wrong, actually it didn't matter. We just learned from it and moved on. And I suppose we would say that was agile, learning as we go and adapting. But it really felt like, and it still does feel like it, that we're all in it together and we all support each other. And that's been really great, to be fair. And it's and long may it continue, actually. But it's been really helpful to support our colleagues when they've had problems, but equally to gain the support from them when we've needed it, genuinely. And that's been great for us as an organisation. Yeah, it's been great. It's been hard work. And to say it's been great isn't the right word, but it's been it's been something I don't think we'll ever forget when we look back.
No, I think that's really true. I think, you've talked about it there, but the one thing the response from our staff, has been outstanding within the organisation, as well as the cooperation across. There are all sorts of challenges you can get with remote working, and I think it has worked really well for us. We are now, I think, missing corridor conversations, opportunistic chats, and this kind of stuff. We do need to get back into the office and meet up in person sometime. You know what I mean? As in, it's not necessarily all day, every day. But the remote working has worked really well. Including things that I was very worried about, like managing incidents. When something goes wrong, dealing with that when everyone's working remotely. But everyone has stepped up, and we've managed to do really quite well. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Carwyn, Rachel, Darren and Claire, for sharing with us your COVID learning on data and technology in a crisis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.